teaching is like an ice cube. It evaporates in room temperature. It evaporates in room temperature. And this is precisely what teaching is. In the spur of the moment, teaching one class after another, working from 8 or 9 till 2 or 3 maybe p.m., our head is buzzing of information. It's all sorts of events and things going around, and we can't get hold of those events anymore. They evaporate. And that's why I think we need to develop ways of kind of preserving, putting the ice cube back into the freezer and then examine it and turn it around and see what it contains, and in this way get a better understanding of what the ice cube consists of. So this is what I mean with the notion of teacher as a researcher, being a curious person about his or her work, being reflective about it. This is precisely how to work against the evaporation, reflecting on what you are doing, collecting some kind of mainly qualitative. You might, of course, carry out opinion polls and that sort of things quickly to get some ideas of how students feel about your teaching, but mainly I'm after written or recorded or tape recorded or video recorded, whatever matter of recording, where we can go back to what was happening and then put it analytically to different kind of factors and carry out a kind of factorial analysis, but not based on numbers, but based on our own understanding of possible factors influencing what is going on in the classroom, in my classrooms, under my teaching and my guidance and supervision. So inquiring teaching, questioning teaching, Dick Allwright says very, very nicely, exploratory teaching. This is my favorite at the moment, exploratory teaching. I want to explore what I'm doing. I want to understand more deeply what I'm doing. Well, and we started moving towards this, and I understand that this kind of approach does not simply drop from the heaven. It has to be worked for. Yeah. It is difficult, it is cumbersome, and it may be sometimes causing anxiety. And in the middle of busy schedules, you might feel that you don't have time and energy. So you have to adapt yourself and justify to yourself why you want to get some sort of data out of your teaching. And it may also be a question of a generation shift, so that those who have done 30 years of teaching based on regular routines may not be willing to start again in a way to turn a new page a blank page in their teaching. But we have been investing on young teachers, as well as obviously those of the older colleagues who wish to join in. And it has been a very important part of our pre-service teacher education since early 90s. We began with project work in the late 80s, 25 years ago, and introduced it by mid-90s as part of our pre-service teacher education. Which means that it's now 20 years later, we have a big base of teachers, a large number of teachers, maybe half of our number of our teachers in the country, who have more or less internalized the idea as part of pre-service teacher education. But then again, the question is that when they go to schools and if they don't get any support, it very easily evaporates like that ice cube. It slips out of your hand like the wet piece of soap. So it has to be supported on the site, in the schools. And that's why we have introduced in the 90s and in the 2000s, during the last 10, 15 years, collegial work. Pair work, professional grouping together with your colleague, like-minded colleague, maybe reluctant colleague, but who says, okay, I can work with you and I can share. And then you develop trust. Without trust, this kind of approach won't work. Yeah. Some part of the work naturally must be done alone. But where I get the empowerment is colleagues coming together, sharing a cup of coffee, sitting down, relaxing, socializing, and then starting to tell about their stories and sharing their stories and developing trust and mutual commitment, and then gradually setting very modest targets. This is what I want to try out. You try out that, you try out that, I try out this. After 2 weeks' time we will meet again and we will have some amount of very modest. Make it as simple and as low a threshold as possible. Small. Think big, look far ahead, but act very small steps. This is how the progress actually takes place. From very small beginnings of 2 or 3 teachers in the workplace, putting their heads together and finding collegiality, finding camaraderie and sharing and trust. And then one class, one project. Make it simple. Don't try to revolutionize the whole world at the same time, because it might go somehow. Take it into small pieces, chew it, reflect it. That means chewing. Reflect on it, share it, and find new perspectives. Whenever possible, the nearest teacher education college or university department, where there are people who are interested in what is going on outside the so-called, notorious ivory towers, if you want to call universities like ivory towers. People who are ready to descend from their ivory towers, walk with the teachers to their schools, bring their respect, their individual, their understanding of the theoretical perspectives and maybe international movements, what is going on in the profession, in addition to a good understanding, obviously, of the US scene. And then you meet together, and that's what I've been doing since, well, early 80s, 35 years before I retired. Finding teachers who are interested to join in, not necessarily knowing what they want to join in, but they are basically unsatisfied with the way things are in their classrooms. And how would I be able to encourage more independent learning, and not independent learning in isolation. By autonomy, I don't mean this kind of autonomy where I push everybody out using my elbows, but it is autonomy where we make an agreement to grow together with the 3 of us. We want to be autonomous, yes, surely in our classrooms, but to be able to do so, we need to become dependent on each other's understanding and expertise, and inviting the head teacher, the principal, and maybe the university lecturer or whatever, researcher, a professor, whoever, in the group, and sharing what might be targets for our project. So we don't work in a vacuum, kind of. We have some concrete problem, or at least a direction to go. And that means that I have to take into consideration my neighbors. I'm not alone in the world. Nobody is.
So it's almost like everybody has a stake in social responsibility.
Indeed.
You want the students to be socially responsible, the teachers, the professors.
And take your time. Don't think you can achieve any significant change in half a year's time. It may be possible with some pupils, with some students who already are there. But for the 99%, usually half a year's time is not enough. And to think about a quick and, whatever, neat 2-week enterprise is like putting water in the Sahara, and it disappears somewhere very quickly. So we usually consider these projects in terms of 2 or 3 years, minimum 1 year rather than half a year. 2 or 3 years. Some projects I have run for 4 years, one project for 5 years, where the first year was just for preparation, professional preparation, without involving any work with the students in the classroom level at all. Explicitly, but obviously teachers were doing an immense amount of reflection as a result, and in connection with the seminars we were working in. So it's also a question of time, and then find projects that can, where the agreement and the commitment is made for a certain amount of time, which where 1 year is maybe a good minimum, but rather aim at collaboration inside the
Communities
classrooms,
of learners.
communities of learners, teaching social skills very explicitly. So we go beyond the rational agenda, learning in a foreign language where the grammar and vocabulary are the rational agenda, and that must be done. But the way is, how is it going to be done to make it socially valuable, socially meaningful? And how do we increase the authenticity in the teaching rather than kind of making prefabricated discussions and then putting aside and everything is done, the group visit is passed. We tend to we begin from an empty piece of paper and you create your cooperation according to the guidelines you give to the students. So they really have to create something which didn't exist previously as part of the workbook exercises or whatever there might be. You go beyond the workbook to the dangerous open air, slippery ice, or whatever metaphor you wish to use. And then you can make a commitment with the students that this experiment will last the whole academic year. And the first semester will be doing this, and then you involve, this is perhaps a further element of long term. It's not something that is top-down dictated to the students, but it is something where you obviously have an offer to make. Look, this is what I have got to offer you, but it is only a blueprint, nothing more than a blueprint. And we have to work together to make the blueprint work in our classroom, in our community, in our school. We have been working on this project for almost quarter of a century at least. And now we are beginning to see the results. So when you come from the States and are kind of surprised to see how quiet and how relaxed it is an outcome of several years and 2 decades of consistent work towards the goal-oriented work, which begins as part of the teacher's pre-service and continues as part of their in-service. They have 2 or 3 compulsory in-service days every year, and we have been trying to use this tiny little resource for the project teacher training. And then using Friday afternoons and Saturday mornings. We definitely finish by Saturday noon, have a lunch together and then start spending our weekend with the families or what. Right, yeah. And in this sense, I think it is also a question of delegating them moral responsibility for what they do and how they relate to their own life, so that it's not something that somebody does for them, but they must take the active agency position, being active social actors in the and in this sense they develop the ownership for their own learning, ownership for their own lives, and that's really a big thing. It starts from tiny little brooks here and there to develop into big rivers and really lakes and whatever there are behind the lakes.
Exactly.
So it gathers from the tiny little drifts of water, and you need to be building on these tiny little drifts, how they develop into brooks and rivers and so once you realize the importance of something that needs to be done, then miracles happen. So it's once you are now, it seems to me, tiny little brooks coming from here and there. You are bringing some of the brooks back to the States from this visit, and your colleagues are visiting Finland. You are inviting my colleague like Pasi Saalberg to talk about Finnish education. He travels between
all over the
Helsinki.
place.
You take examples, you let in the good rivers, and then you start. And the ambush that Nancy is describing here is not going to, how would I say, you can overcome it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yes. It seems to be that some of the things you have been talking and I've been listening to you saying is that this kind of vicious circling, whirling around. And now the big question is to ask questions like, whose benefit is this system service? Who are the present beneficiaries? What are the educational values connected with this kind of, if I may say, vicious circle? And can we stop this circle? And can we, little, by taking small manageable steps, change the direction of the vicious circle into something that is virtuous circle? And how might we get momentum behind this virtual circle and help it grow and grow, rather than vicious circle shrinking people, literally shrinking their personal identities? Teachers, students, parents, principals, shrinking their identity and their human maneuvering space. They become kind of faceless, tiny little parts of the system. Maybe struggle for encouraging the public awareness of where is this process leading us to, as the leading nature in the world, as you want to say, and with good reason. Certainly, to be frank about the change, it is never going to be easy. And once we accept that change is difficult, both in terms of the intellectual understanding, that may be a problem, but that's usually the smallest problem. The next problem is my prejudices and beliefs. How do I see the world being? How do I see my own role? What are my values related to a just society? The deeper you dig into your own personality, like my values, you are digging in your heart. And it's never easy to change something that has been rooted. But once there are, you must wait. These are the reasons for keeping the status quo. Here are the reasons for starting a big change process. And then
use them, but
right. You have to start somewhere.